What if a teenager figured out how to outsmart banks, airlines, and entire institutions, and no one suspected a thing? In the late 1960s, a young man began moving quietly through the United States, leaving behind a trail of financial chaos that authorities struggled to understand. His name was Frank William Abagnale Jr., and before he turned 21, he had already committed millions of dollars in fraud. But his story didn't start with banks. It started with something much smaller. After his parents divorced, Abagnale found himself drifting, angry, confused, and determined to survive on his own. At just 16 years old, he left home and began figuring out ways to make money. At first, the schemes were simple. He altered his own bank account details to access funds that weren't really there. It worked, not because the system was weak, but because no one expected someone so young to understand it. That was the moment everything changed. He realized something powerful. People don't question confidence. And from that point on, Abagnale didn't just commit fraud. He became someone else. One of his most famous identities was that of an airline pilot. Wearing a carefully tailored uniform, walking with confidence, and speaking with authority, he convinced airline staff that he was legitimate. He traveled across the country and even internationally without paying for flights. No one stopped him. No one questioned him, because he looked exactly like someone who belonged there. But while the uniform gave him access, the real money came from something else entirely: checks. Abagnale began forging checks with incredible precision. He studied bank systems, understood how transactions were processed, and recreated documents that looked completely authentic. To bank employees, everything appeared normal. The signatures matched, the formats were correct, the accounts seemed legitimate. So the money moved. Again and again, city after city, bank after bank. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't panicking. Every move was calculated, controlled, and confident. And that's what made him so difficult to catch. By the time authorities started noticing the pattern, he was already gone. Investigators from multiple states began comparing reports. The same type of fraud kept appearing. Clean, precise, almost invisible. There were no obvious mistakes, no clear identity, just a ghost moving through the financial system. And then things escalated. Abagnale didn't just pretend to be a pilot, he posed as a doctor. In one case, he managed to work in a hospital environment without formal training, blending in simply by observing others and mimicking their behavior. Later, he even impersonated a legal professional, passing himself off as someone qualified in a field that required years of education. It seemed impossible, but it kept working because people trusted appearances, they trusted uniforms, they trusted confidence, and Abagnale mastered all three. But no system stays fooled forever. As the scale of the fraud increased, federal authorities became deeply involved. The case expanded beyond local police. It became a national priority. They studied his methods, tracked his patterns, analyzed every transaction. Slowly, they began to understand how he operated, and more importantly, where he might go next. The chase intensified. Abagnale, sensing the pressure, left the United States. He moved across Europe, continuing his schemes under new identities, adopting to new systems, staying one step ahead. For a while, it worked. He was still in control, still confident, still untouchable. Until one moment changed everything. In France, someone recognized him, a face from a wanted notice. A single moment of recognition was all it took. Authorities moved quickly, and for the first time in years, Frank Abagnale Jr. was no longer in control. He was arrested. After years of deception, movement, and manipulation, the man who had fooled so many systems was finally stopped. He was later extradited back to the United States, where he faced multiple charges tied to fraud, identity deception, and financial crimes. The story could have ended there. Another criminal caught, another case closed. But this one didn't, because what happened next was something no one expected. Instead of spending decades behind bars, Abagnale was given an opportunity. The same skills that allowed him to exploit the system could be used to protect it. He began working with federal authorities, helping banks and organizations understand how fraud actually happens, not in theory, but in reality. He showed them the weaknesses, the blind spots, the human errors that made his crimes possible. The criminal became a consultant, the fraudster became an expert, and the man who once walked into banks undetected was now helping them prevent others from doing the same. Today, his story is studied, discussed, and remembered not just because of the crimes, but because of what those crimes revealed: that systems can fail, that trust can be manipulated, and that sometimes the most dangerous advantage isn't power, it's understanding how people think. Because Frank Abagnale Jr. didn't rely on force, he didn't rely on fear. He relied on something far more subtle: believability. And that's what makes his story so unsettling, because it leaves one question behind. If someone can become whoever they want, convince everyone around them, and walk through systems without resistance, how many others have done the same and were never caught?